From the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased to have with me, joining me from the US, Jodi Hume. Jodi, thank you very much for joining me today. The way I love to do it, and the audience know by now, is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves because I have a theory. The best one who can introduce themselves is themselves. So the floor is yours.
Great. So I'm Jodi Hume, and I'm a third generation entrepreneur. So I have been around entrepreneurial conversations and decisions since I was a little kid. But and then I spent 16 years with an architecture firm as their COO as we grew from 8 people up to almost 50 people. And so I got to be in all the decisions around that. But for the last 15 years, I have been doing facilitation of leadership conversations and what started off as coaching, but is now something that I refer to as decision support for entrepreneurs and founders who are navigating both growth and then ultimately acquisition. And so it's a blend of there's some coaching in there, there's some advising, a little bit of consulting here and there where it makes sense, and then a lot of something that I would call business therapy, if that was such a thing. I'm not a therapist, but business is uniquely daunting from a personal development and emotional and energetic regulation, as well as the cognitive toll of it. And that kind of Venn diagram of all those things together is like the space I love to play in.
Very much, things that I love to talk about, like the journey. So
Are we going to nerd out on stuff here?
yeah, exactly. So the first
Perfect.
thing usually I am always curious to know. So what was the driver for you to shift or to do this transition from, architecture firm to providing these things? And to be honest with you, coaching people is not easy because you need to do a lot of listening yourself, and then you
Yeah.
need to, but I'm sure you had kind of a motivation or a purpose. So if you can just share that with us.
Yeah. So yes and no. So here's the funny thing. My entire life, I have been this interesting blend of left brain and right brain. I started off as an engineering major in college, and then I switched to psychology. And sometimes people say, well, Howard, that was a big jump. I'm like, is it really? Because engineering ultimately and psychology are both about figuring out why something works or doesn't work. It's this teasing apart of the variables and reverse engineering things and solving problems and getting to the bottom of a thing. So they both play in my brain in the exact same way. And so then when I was with the architecture firm, there were a lot of direct business things I was in charge of. I never meant to go there in the first place. I just took a job right out of college, actually as the receptionist at first, and then they made me the marketing director. And I discovered very quickly, or maybe not so quickly, I was discovered over the years that I am extremely good at making things better. I think I knew that part already. I kind of revamped marketing and got that machine rolling. The part I learned about myself there was that once something is better and it's operationalized and it's working, I am not the person to keep it going. That is not the magic that I bring to the world. I am really good. So I would move on to making other things better. And something I think we do a lot is, you encounter a weakness, you think, oh, I need to get better at that. Because of the way they were structured there, I was really blessed with the fact that when I got bored with that, when it wasn't for me anymore, I was able to hire somebody, they allowed me to hire somebody else to do that. And I took over, I revamped the finances, and then I redid this. And that's how I became COO, was just following that path of where the energy was for me. And when that energy left, at the time that was a gift from them. I learned through that though, that is actually an incredibly valuable and strategic entrepreneurial skill of following where your energy is. It's don't write it off as like a indulgent thing. It is a sign of where your magic, where your superpowers really are, and finding ways to get other people to do the other things. But along that way, while I was being COO, I did have this unnamed, unofficial role of the one of the principals used to jokingly call me the ombudsman. I was the person that handled all of that smushier personal, like we didn't even know the word coaching, but like the people stuff in the office, and this like, kind of glue that kept it all together. And so I was getting to use like both these sides of my brain, kind of the brain and the heart is more almost what we were talking about, like the coaching listening. But interestingly, and this leads up to where I made the shift. So one of the things under my purview was the IT stuff, and I would do the most base level IT troubleshooting before we would call our actual IT guy. And if you've ever done IT troubleshooting, it is all about isolating the variables. First you swap out the cable and you're like, okay, it's not the cable. Maybe it's the network card. And so you'd swap that out, or you log in as a different profile. That skill set of isolating the variables is exactly the same skill set I use when I am facilitating or when I am working one-on-one with an owner to try and get to the solution of a thing or understand what the problem is. It's the exact same thing. And so I started off taking facilitation training through Hopkins because I wanted to do that. Our clients at the time needed that. And so I was looking for a new thing. And we had grown to be like 40 people, and I was out of things to fix, which was a bummer because I loved that company and I didn't necessarily want to leave, but the gum was losing its flavor for me of the actual work that I was doing. To answer your question, is like I loved the company, but I needed a new thing. And so I took the facilitation and training and then coaching training. And I ended up doing both for about 7 or 8 years. I did them on the side. They were fine with it. And then ultimately that just became very clear that that was the work I needed to be doing in the world, and not being at the architecture firm. So I made a very gradual jump. Some people quit their job and start their company. That was not for me, because that also happened to coincide when I had my 2 children. And so it was it was a good way to kind of make a very long, slow transition.
Absolutely. I love to hear these stories because at the end of the day, and we're gonna talk about like some of this stuff, to show people that there's no single path to do something, right? Um,
No. In fact, I just spoke to some high school students and I told them, like, there is not a single thing that I get paid to do right now that I even knew existed until I was like 30. I couldn't have charted a
yeah.
course towards where I am. And I am in the dead center of the work I should be doing in the world. And I didn't even know this world existed when I was 18, 20, 25, 28.
So, Jody, you work with a lot of founders, right?
Mhm.
Um, on my show, there's one specific, I would say, category of these founders that um, I like to give them more, attention, which are the first-time founders, because
Ah,
from my discussions, with all my guests, like whether they were on the technical side, the business side, and even the coaches and the leaders that I had the chance and I was honored to talk to them, what I found out is once you learn it, like if you are like second time, third time founder, of course you're gonna make mistakes. Of course you're gonna have to have a mentor, coach, whatever. But the first time founders are, the ones who are like you just drop them kind of middle of nowhere and they have to figure out things. So from
yeah.
your experience working with a lot of founders and having your experience, what do you say their major challenges are usually? And maybe it's like I'm not trying to make it a loaded question, but if you can also dissect, for each one of these challenges, what could be, the best path or way to overcome this challenge?
Yeah. So when you say their biggest challenge, I'm going to skip over some of the obvious ones that people hear
Sure.
about the most because like obviously, you know, market fit and like getting clients, like the sales, like those things, everybody knows those are challenges. And there's a million resources for that. I want to really highlight some of the things that maybe people hear less about, especially because um one of my frustrations in the world, and part of the reason that I do this work, is that there's this weird taboo in business where in a very large number of the places that you hear people talking about their experience of starting, growing, running, selling a company, you only hear their success stories. Certainly as they're growing it, when you meet them out somewhere, they're going to tell you everything that's going fantastically. They're going to tell you we're killing it. We got this client. Like you have to go out and present this like this is what's working. It's a requirement as an entrepreneur in a lot of ways. But usually the only time you hear here's where we thought it was all going to end, here's where we skidded off the rails and went into the ditch, like usually you will only hear those on the path to then them telling you the great success story on the end. And that's lovely, but it doesn't really help people find themselves in the moment. And it's a weird metaphor, but I think of it the same way as like my grandmother was born like 1920 and no one told her about puberty. So like when she got to that point in the world, like she thought she was dying. And I feel like a lot of that is like that for first time founders. There's so much they don't see in other founders' journeys that when it happens to them, they think they're broken or not cut out to be a founder, like their company's failing. And I'm like, oh no, dude, that's just what happens when you have like that's what happens when you hire your first couple people, or that's what happens when you get around like 10 to 12 people, this starts to happen, or like 18 people, this starts to happen. So there's all these like business puberty things. So that's one lesson in and of itself is do not suffer alone. Find somewhere where you can hear from other people about like, is this me or is this just what happens? So finding other ways and places where people will be candid with you and sharing your own experiences for other people so that it takes a village to do a lot more than raise a child, and finding those connections and community is super important. Um, leadership, they say leadership, it's lonely at the top. It should not be lonely at the top. That is one of the biggest mistakes you can make in business is being lonely, because isolation causes indecision, it causes all sorts of things, and it causes the mental health issues that founders are prone to have, which leads me to my second point. Um, do not overstep your energetic and emotional regulation. Those things there's a lot of talk about burnout, and burnout's super important to avoid. I'm not gonna poo-poo avoiding burnout, but because of the nature of like hustle culture and sort of like the romanticized versions of startups, and like you are gonna work very hard and be very tired and be very exhausted and frustrated and all those things. But by the time you're talking about burnout, you are way past the point. Like the part where this is from a neuroscience standpoint, what your brain needs to be cognitively optimized is to not be overwhelmed, to not be exhausted, to not be energetically hijacked. Like the I think what people don't understand is all of the things you need to be a really high functioning founder, those executive functioning, like prioritizing and strategizing and decision making and all those things are executive functioning. Energetic and emotional regulations are prerequisites to that part of your brain being able to function. So it is not some smushy like self-care thing. It is an Olympic athlete level strategy to manage your energy and your emotions. And the best founders, the ones I've had who've sold their companies to Google and to whatever, they absolutely prioritize those things in a shameless and relentless way because they know that's what optimizes their cognitive capacity. And so do not step over those things. And that includes, as I alluded to before, your energy, like your excitement. And that's not to say that you're not gonna have to do things you really don't want to do, but you have to pay attention to follow the juice. If everyone in your company is working on their highest and best use and the stuff that really gives them energy, your company will go much further than if everyone's slogging.
There are a couple of points that, just, when you mentioned them, something sparked in my brain. So the first thing is burnout, and you talked about the hustling culture. And at the same time, we see the stories, and this applies not only for founders, it applies everywhere. Like you should be also like kind of resilient, you know. But as a founder, how I can know, and burnout, by the way, and we had, I think last year, just one episode just about burnout, right? It's
Mhm.
it's something very dangerous. So how I can know as a founder that actually, okay, hold on. I think I'm doing this too much. I should take a break, step back, think about it, and then come back. And because, Jody, what happens sometimes because of the excitement that you talked about, and because all, the way I like this term. We romanticize, the whole startup story, and people they think if we gotta go to this route, this what's gonna happen. Which is, I
Mhm.
don't think it's a destiny because they can do it in different way. So
Right.
when is the moment that they need really to say, hey, I need to stop, I need to reflect, I need to maybe go talk to someone.
Yeah. So the things that I think that are most obvious but most missed, that sentence didn't make sense, but hold on a second. The most regular, probably is a better way to say it, and most missed are things like indecision or spinning your wheels or self doubt, like anything that is slowing you down. Um, I actually think of it so like here in, it snows here. It's very muddy sometimes in the spring. Anytime that if you've ever been in a place, any place where your car is spinning wheels, if you've ever been in that experience, the thing you don't just keep hitting the gas. That just digs you deeper into the thing. Anything that is causing that kind of wheel spinning or repetitive, can't get out of a thing, what you need in that moment is traction. You have to find some way to get traction with the thing. I mean, that usually, from a brain standpoint, requires like stepping away. So there's a couple things to keep in mind here because resiliency is not an after the fact. You don't run yourself into the ground and then try to become resilient. Resiliency is a discipline practice of investing in your store of like what you have to like your reserve to pull from when you are feeling exhausted. And I mean, I know we saw a lot of this after COVID. People kind of run through their stores, and so they would just get more irritated more quickly or they get tired faster, and it was because we kind of depleted those stores of what you kind of lean into. But so a couple things, there's some ways you can get the further back into the cycle of depletion that you can go, the more resilient you will be because the half-life of that resilience lasts longer. So there's some really basic things like is well proven scientifically, like our brains are not designed to marathon throughout the day. We are designed to sprint. And so what that means is if every 60 minutes, 90 minutes, you take even a 5-minute break, and that doesn't mean like go play on your phone, but just walk around the house once, stand up and do jumping jacks, like go sit outside and close your eyes and listen to the birds for a minute. Just some kind of period at the end of a sentence with a space before you start the next thing will improve the half-life of that glucose, which this prefrontal cortex part of your brain is responsible for all the things you needed to do to grow your company. And that part of your brain gobbles up glucose faster than the rest of it, like tied together. And you see this even if you're not a founder, anyone who has woken up who gets up in the middle in the morning and says, I'm going to eat all the right things and drink water and have all these wonderful habits. And you're pretty good at that throughout the day. And then there comes a point like late afternoon going into evening and you go home and you're like, no, I'm just going to eat all the cookies and potato chips and have a drink. Um, that is not, that is not, there's a reason for that. It's because your prefrontal cortex is also in charge of impulse control. And if you have burned through your glucose throughout the day, by the end of the day, you don't have the reserve for impulse control. And so it just gets harder in the evenings. And so by doing little sprints throughout the day and taking some breaks, you can get further without losing some of that cognitive capacity. And that also applies to decisions. Like if you can reduce your decisions, because that part of your brain is in charge of decisions. So even that's why they say don't pick up your phone and start deciding email, yes, no, because that's deciding and you're burning that glucose on what is quantifiably a pretty low level decision versus getting up and doing something um, that really that creates progress first with that part of your brain. Which also, I won't totally nerd out on the brain thing here. This also ties into dopamine, like being really conscious of your dopamine. I don't fully understand the science of this just yet, but I know it to be true and I've experienced it. Where you get your dopamine first in the morning will determine what your brain reaches for throughout the day. And so the two big things here is if you pick up your phone and do social media or get those like fast clicks of dopamine, the rest of your day you'll kind of be chasing that junk food version of dopamine. Whereas if you get up and do something that checks a productivity box, even like unloading the dishwasher or whatever, like something that is progress oriented, your brain will reach for that throughout the day. And that is more the energy you need as a founder.
That's very important. And yeah, I agree with you about, the point of how to get the dopamine. I used to do it the wrong way before
Oh
until
yeah.
I learned from some books and some articles.
Trust me, I've
You
I've like the reason I'm so solid on this is I personally tested it a bunch of days. Like I will wake up and just like play on TikTok for half an hour and then see how my day goes versus if I wake up and when I say half an hour, I'm like, yeah, right, half an hour. Once you start, you're like, and
absolutely.
it's a bummer. Like I hate it because like I'm like, okay, I have now experienced with like a reliable set of statistics that it's impossible to ignore that it does change the texture and flavor of my day based on what I do first. And so that's just a discipline is like I don't have some like really rigorous morning routine. I'm not that person, but I do reliably make a very conscious choice of what I do first. And I did want to add one last thing to that list of like things to do. do this one, I know this one feels like so hard, but if you could just trust me on this one. When it feels like the very last thing you can do is take a break and, for instance, go walk in nature or something like that. Like I really push my entrepreneurs into I don't know if you've seen the 7 kinds of rest because they're bad at regular rest. Like these are not people who like lay down and chill out. Like they need active rest. And so if you look through the 7 kinds of rest, it's also important because you don't always need physical rest. Sometimes you need like technology rest. Sometimes you need social rest if you're not getting the right energy from other people. Sometimes you need creative rest, like doodling or taking a walk. Watch out for when it feels like the very last thing you could do is rest or stop and prioritize and take stock and like when it feels like that's the last thing you could do, trust that that is absolutely the most important strategic thing you could do. That is the sign that that's what you need is when it feels like you can't possibly do that. And that's so hard. Like I get it. It's hard for me too and I preach it all the time. But much like the dopamine thing, it's just real. That's how you know.
Yeah, of course. And I know, Jody, like you have some, psychology background. You said you're not a
Not a
therapist, but
therapist, but, I don't know. I was a psychology major, and then in the, 30 years since then, I feel like there's a certain number of, like, articles and books you read that they should just be like, "Yeah, that counts. You have a degree."
exactly. Now, one of the things, and even we discussed it before, which causes stress, which is that when they have, I mean, the founder, they have something very important and they need to decide on, and then they feel they are stuck.
Mhm.
Um, from your experience, first, what causes this? Because uh, I know that they, in the background, they feel that, okay, we are startup, we are agile, I need to take decision very quickly. But at the same time, and I've seen people, by the way, who told me that, you know what, I'm not able to take a decision.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about like major ones. I'm not talking about like just as simple things. So what causes that, and how they can overcome this?
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh, like, I have to say which things I tell you here. So a couple things. One, it is you kind of have to release the shame about indecision in a startup because you are most often more often than not, you are trying to create something or build something that has never existed before. So having a little bit of empathy for yourself around feeling like you're supposed to know is actually one of the things that causes indecision, because indecision isn't actually a thing in and of itself. It's like it's kind of the structures you're putting around a decision. It's almost like walls you put around it that make it impossible for you to accept any door as like the door to walk through. So you kind of have to step back and say, like, what is, you have to, it's like a metacognition thing. You have to look at your thinking and why you're making the decision. What about the decision? So I'm going to hit on a couple of things here. One, um, I had a client who was a design professor who said something so profound to me once that I feel like I say it once a week, that he said when his students ask him what's the right font or the best font, he said he tells them it's so rarely about getting the right font or the best font. You in design, you really just have to make sure you don't have the wrong font. And it's so true. Like as long as the font isn't distracting or illegible, people aren't going to notice the difference between like this font and this other one that has like a tiny bit more of a serif. Like you just need to avoid having the wrong font, and then it's probably fine. And in entrepreneurship, especially when you are doing something that's never existed before, whatever part of you imagines that there's some script that's invisible that you are trying to yet like, perform on this script, it's not there. There is no script. There is no map. You are doing improv. So you get a little bit of information and you do with it what you can, and you get a little bit more information and you do with it what you can. That's as close as you get to a right answer. So you kind of have to loosen your grip on imagining that there is a right answer. And so I kind of break it down over the years. I think of it as like a couple, like three things really, and they all happen to start with C. I actually hate when people have like an alliteration to their things. It kind of bums me out. They'll start with a C. Didn't do that on purpose. What people are most often looking for is clarity. And so some people, if you're a verbal processor, you might need to talk a thing through with someone else to get clear what's in your own mind. Internal processors simply don't need that and don't understand why other people do. But if you are a verbal processor, and I would just add this layer to, this might get harder for you as your company grows if you get, especially if you get investors, because sometimes what happens is the people you used to talk things through with, if they become investors, that might start to feel like a harder conversation to have. So you just always have to be aware that if you're a verbal processor, you must have people that you can verbally process with. Most of my clients are verbal processors. It's a big part of why my business exists. So sometimes you need that to get clarity. Clarity also comes from information or guidance. So you can find clarity. It's great to ask other people, but one of the reasons I see people get indecisive is, way too many advisors, way too many investors, lots of people telling you what to do. That can cloud and muddy your perspective. At the end of the day, you know your company better than anyone. You have to get like, I value input from a lot of people, but ultimately when I'm listening to someone, I am listening for what they know deep inside of them, what they need. Like, so sometimes you need clarity, information to get clarity, but it's not usually that indecisiveness. It's not usually that. It's one of these other buckets, which is either confidence or courage. And the reason I make that distinction is confidence is like, oh, it's in there, it's resonant. You can't get clear because there's not enough information to get like crystal clear with clarity. So you have to kind of lean into, okay, I know enough that I have a decent gut feeling that this is the right thing. I've checked with a couple trusted people. They don't see any blind spots. They don't think it's the wrong font. I've done my due diligence to make sure this isn't a terrible mistake and then I'm not missing something huge. I'm just going to go for it. That's kind of the confidence piece. And then there's courage, where for better or for worse, there are going to be a bunch of times where you don't have a lot of information, not even enough to have a decent sense of confidence. No one else can really guide you because no one else has done this before. They don't know. You can't know. And you just have to lean into this courage to close your eyes, take a deep breath, take action, and trust that you will course correct, which is the other last piece about decision that I think we always forget. I think we imagine that like we move a piece on the chessboard and then the game will stay in that shape forever. And that's not how it works. Every action you take will will change the entire game. And then you will make new decisions. And one of the biggest skill sets you need as an entrepreneur is like course correction for the decision you made last week or last quarter that didn't work out the way you imagined. Doesn't mean it was a wrong decision. It just means that now it needs course correction. And relaxing into that is one of the best things you can do for yourself as a founder.
Now I'm gonna ask you this question, Jody, and this is just me. Uh, I love to follow the successful entrepreneurs, and even the ones who they have their style. One of the things that I noticed that sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, uh, on the last quote you mentioned, the ability to correct the decision if it's wrong. But what I see is, and me included, by the way, all of us, I think, by nature, we have that ego. Okay, I took that decision. You know what? I will not change my mind because I think I did the right thing. So, how this is critical to remove the ego, especially because, you're running a business, and maybe some other people's lives are dependent on, of course not in the physical sense, depending on your decisions. So how me as a founder should I really remove the ego and accept that, yeah, sometimes I will be able to do mistakes?
Well, okay. So I think part of the reason I love working in business is just how often the most profound advice is contradictory to itself. So I'm actually going to talk to both sides of what you said because both are true, and that is the art of business, is deciding between both ends of what is true. So on the one hand, you said, like, I made a decision and I'm going to stick with it because I know that it was right. That is actually an important skill of entrepreneurship. You will, in order to create something that's never existed, or that you are going to have to go against the grain of people who can only see what they've seen before in that moment. And people have varying degrees. Like, there are some people who will only ever see that. Then you might have an investor who does have that like visionary capacity, but he just can't quite see what you can see yet in this like crazy vision you have of what you want. So you cannot judge by what other people are saying it's the right or wrong decision. There are absolutely times you have to be like, everyone is telling me this is wrong, and I have to keep going. That's how you get to new places. And so that's important. But what you're talking about is slightly different, or could be, where you need to loosen the ego is where the evidence of what you actually care about and what matters to you and your company as progress is telling you that it's the wrong thing. So make up a scenario. I make a decision about something because I think it's what my customers need, and none of my customers are agreeing that they want that. And I hold tight to that decision because I just don't want to be wrong. Well, that's a really fast way to tank a company. Like when you ignore the data, when you ignore the things that actually rate whether you're doing the right thing. Now, slight nuance to that is if people need to be educated because they don't know they need something yet, then you have to back it up to, well, what are they cognizant to? What what do they care about? What will they say yes to now so that I can move them towards that thing? Like, it's like, what's the thing? Sell them what they want and then give them what they need. Like, there is that aspect to it a little bit. But to your point, needing to be right is not a helpful skill in entrepreneurship, because everything about it is like the space shuttle. I read one time, and then I talked to an actual rocket scientist about this. It is true. So like the space shuttle or anything they send into space, it's never actually, there's no point at which it is actually on course. Like, they are just constantly course correcting it. So the minute they like it to the left, it's off course, and it's just an issue of like, how long do they wait before they it back to the right some, and that's how they get a thing where it's going. And that's kind of what happens in entrepreneurship. I mean, you think about how like delegating works. I have rarely seen a growing company not do this like, oh, I really, I can't, I'm the CEO, I can't have my fingers in everything. So I'm going to really let my team run with this. And I've never seen someone make that very important step without then getting to the like, oh my God, it never occurred to me that they do it that way. And now this is off the rails. So I have to like pull back and guide it a little bit, but you don't want to go back over to micromanaging. And that like, where is this sweet spot where like it all works? But I think what we don't understand sometimes, and this is how I help people kind of loosen that grip on being right, is those both all of those are right. Like your brain learns from contrast. So like you're like, oops, that's not quite right. And then you bounce back and you're like, oops, that's not quite right. That is how you build neuroplasticity. That's also how you build actual muscles in your body. Interestingly, like when you wobble and you have to like tighten yourself back up, that's how your brain learns the muscle memory of how to like do a thing. So it's less about like, I don't think of it as trying to, let go of your ego because I think that's a really tough thing. I think it's more about reframing what right is. It like if you want to think of right as I chose something and I'm going to white knuckle hold on to it forever, I don't I struggle to see how that's not being right. That cuz it cuz the moment it starts not working, you're now wrong. And so you're actually holding tight on to something that's wrong. And so just being open to new data, because as the data changes, you were right in the moment because that's all the information you had. Now you have new information. If you don't update with the new information, you are now holding tight to something that has been proven wrong. And if you know the survival of the fittest, it's a very like known phrase. I heard someone talking the other day that we think of that as like the most capable, the strongest, the who could dominate. She said, but that is actually not what that phrase means. It's about fit. It's about adaptability. It is survival of the fittest, the most able to adapt, fit to new information and new stimuli. And so that's how I think of the relationship with being right.
And in startups, everything is about being agile and measuring and seeing
Yes.
if things are going well. So do you think the because first time founders, probably also it's the first time for them to be having a role of a leader.
Yes.
So, and a leader, and there's a lot of things that are out there, but for to me, the leader is someone who listen to what other people are telling. He put his ideas also, and then try to lead the team by what he thinks or she thinks is the right way to do it. And then, to your point, when he or she finds out that, okay, there's something wrong, okay, come back, let's sit as a team and
Yeah.
see what we do next. Now, but this skill, the leadership skill, Jody, uh, of course, like they need to learn down the road. But is there anything usually you advise, your the people you consult to them on, what is the leadership style, let's say, or like what are like some of the common maybe advices that they need to listen to be successful leaders, because it's all about leadership at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that comes up later that I would love to save people from in advance because it is always harder. It's always going to be harder to course correct things later than it is. Like once threads have gotten woven into your culture or to your team structure, it's harder to unweave them than it is to just weave them incorrectly in the first place. It can be done absolutely, but it's just a little harder. So I think one of the most important things is not imagining that leadership is about knowing all the answers. Like it is much more about surfacing the right questions and then also involving your team in the decision process of those. So one of the biggest mistakes I see people make, and very early on, again, this is why it's hard. Very early on, you are going to be the generator of the vision and the guidance and the answers because it's all in your head and and that will remain the way. You're the one with the vision. Like people aren't just going to instantly get your vision and internally be able to make those decisions super early on. But the faster and the earlier that you can be training other people in what you see and how you think and being transparent with that so that they can get it and develop their own internal GPS. Because the frustrations I hear later is everyone always has to come to me. I've told them they can, make choices. Why don't they just make choices? But then also being frustrated. Well, they made these choices and it's not what I wanted. Like that friction is always there. That is 100% a sign that they can't see what you see. And so this is especially true with visionary people. Like something happens, what they don't even realize is like a movie plays in their head, like a decision tree unfolds in their head in like a nanosecond. They're not even always aware how they're weighing the different variables or how they're considering what they're considering or like how they get to those things. So how on earth is someone else supposed to be able to understand and make similar decisions? So a couple things I've seen work. This one I drew from a parenting book I was reading one time where it was saying, like, if you want your kids to, for instance, be able to be patient or handle frustration, those are more often than not things that you are doing in your body, inside your body, in your head, and they have no idea it's happening. So you need to narrate that. Like if you are standing in line at the grocery store and it's really long and you're feeling frustrated, to say to your toddler or 5 or 6 year old, like, wow, I'm feeling really frustrated. This is taking so long. I'm going to use this technique to be more patient in this moment. It's just narrating what is happening so that they can be like, oh, so that's how you dig deep for patience or whatever. Otherwise, how on earth are they supposed to understand the concept of patience? You say to like, you just have to be patient. What does it even mean? What is be patient? And so I have often worked with especially fast thinking visionary folks to slow down that movie enough that they can see some of the key frames. They don't have to teach every single frame, but like what are the decision points so that someone else can start to play that same movie at least in pieces, like even one or two key pieces. So to say like, well, when it comes to this and this, I always prioritize that. Like if push comes to shove, I decide that. If you tell me that, then I know and I have the confidence to make that decision and know that I'm not doing the wrong thing, because otherwise you're setting people up to get their fingers slapped, and people don't like to take risk unless they know there's a relative safety to it. So if you can reduce the risk by helping them see what you see. This is also true for bigger corporate decisions. Like the more you can involve people in the thought process, this is true for all teams everywhere. If someone has participated in the decision structure, and they don't have to be in every little bit of the way, and no, this does not mean decide by consensus. This does not mean everybody gets a say. That is not what I'm talking about. This is making your life easier along the road by giving them some part of the context along the way, even if you just like pull out one little snippet and kind of have them say like, well, here's what we were thinking about. And they grapple with it in their own brain, and then they're with you. Whereas if you go through this crazy long decision, I've seen this happen so many times. You go through this whole thing either in your own head or just with like you and a co-founder, and you decide a thing and then go try and announce it to people. They are only seeing that last bit. So they can't know. Like I've seen so many times where the staff will be like, oh, this is a terrible decision. Or it's a terrible option. And what I want to say is, oh my Lord, you should have seen the other 3 options that they had. Like they were so awful. This one's like glowing rosy sunshine rainbows compared to the other choices, but they don't know that. So they have no context. So you're just creating a lot of friction and swimming upstream for yourself if you hold everything really close to the vest. Don't operate with transparency, as much transparency as you can possibly tolerate for yourself. Again, that doesn't mean you share every little thing of like the sky is falling and we won't be able to make payroll next. Maybe not that much, but helping people understand like, hey, when we do these things, it benefits us in this way financially, and therefore that has value and we should prioritize it. Then they have that internal GPS to decide with you. So those are some of the biggest things that I think are investing early in a team of people who see what you see and know what you know, and involving them so that it's not all on you. Because if you get to 6, 8, 10, 12 people and everyone has to come back to you to check so that they know what to do next, you're going to be absolutely miserable and it will stagnate the growth of your company so quickly.
Absolutely. Like great advice, Jody. Now, how, a question that also people ask me sometimes, like, especially first time founders. Again, I relate to another question later, like how early in their startup stages they need to go and start to work with people like yourself, Jody, because sometimes it might be very late, right? So if someone
Yeah.
comes to you and they tell you, hey, like we have this problem, I'm sure that you might say, hey, like you're too late, sorry, right? So
No, it's never, well, I mean, I started to say it's never too late. I don't like absolutes.
I like this.
Yeah.
I'm not testing, but I
Yeah.
love people who are optimistic, like you said. So, but
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
there should be like a sweet spot. Let's call it this way.
There is. And I would say that, like, so really early on, you probably don't, I mean, I think there's always value in, I work with startups who are literally just coming up with their idea all the way up through selling like huge companies. So where most of my one-on-one, where the like the on-call decision support, where I am at their beck and call when they need it, that tends to be a more valuable service. um when, let's say, there's no magic to this, but you have like 20 people, 30 people, like there's so much going on. You're going, you're fundraising, you're maybe going through processes to consider exits, like there's a lot more going on. And so it definitely makes sense. The thing that really I think you can get from day one, you cannot go too early on this, is anything you need some place. And like, for instance, I have a group of SaaS founders, and a lot of them are in the very early stages. And this is a great place where they get like a little bit of me, but what they really are getting is I hate that this phrase is so loaded now, but like a safe place. And again, this is not smushy. This is, as Seth Godin says, if you have a problem you can't talk about, now you have two problems. And you have to have a place where you can lay it all down and be candid and honest and vulnerable about what you're actually grappling with. You have to have that from day one. And often that's like friends or family in the beginning. The challenge can be there is that sometimes those friends or family don't have a second question, like they don't understand. So you need someone, and they don't have to be the same person, but you need someone who understands your business. You need someone who understands you. You need someone who is at least cognizant of what's going on in your life, because that absolutely plays in on all this. And you need someone or someones who have been in this experience. And so early on, being in a roundtable, not a roundtable that is just simply focused on another place to come and hear best practices and for everyone to say like, I'm killing it and here's all the good news. I mean, that's great. It serves a certain purpose. If you go and you hear the latest speaker on marketing, that's like, all those things are necessary. But again, like it's almost like the therapy thing, the group therapy, interestingly, because it's not always just about problems. Like there's a whole side of this that I don't often get to talk about because it just doesn't come up as often. The other thing that's lacking in not having someone to talk to is actually not having people to get a satisfying, and that's the important word there, a satisfying high five out of for what you just accomplished. Like I had a client who pulled off a thing in a contract with a company we would all recognize the name of. And there was literally no one she could tell that to, who either it would be a breach of confidence to tell, like, so it was just like, it was inappropriate to share it, or like, she was like, "Well, I could have told my mom, but my mom has no concept of what that took to pull that off." So even though she's like, "Great," she's like, "I'm not satisfied because," and normally those kinds of things she might tell like a CEO friend, but because of what the contract was and the NDAs and all that stuff, she couldn't do that. So you have to have a place. I consider it both ends of real, for the really crappy, not fun, I'm not sure. That goes all the way to like business hospice, as I call it, like those days where you're like, I think I just need to burn it down. You have to have a place where you can talk about those things. And you also need a place where you can shamelessly gloat and brag, and where you can hear that you are doing a good job. Because that is the other thing that I don't think people realize goes away. People think that founders are constantly getting all this positive validation. That is not the case. More often than not, they are questioning their worth and value and like all the time. And people just forget that they also need to hear, like, hey, you did a really good job in that presentation to the team. No one ever says that. They think they don't need to hear it. So you get that early as you possibly can and build a strong network. Build your village. I don't know if I already said this, but like it takes a village to build to, they say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to grow a company, and you building that village early, you can't do that early enough. There comes a point where maybe having the right kind of advisor. People have lots of startup advisors. The challenge is if that person has a horse in your race, that's where it can get really tricky, where you need an objective person somewhere in there for sure.
Like this is, really the way you're telling this, Jody. Like I hope, because this is the energy that I took, just having someone to talk to them the way you're doing, and I think they are about to take a major decision. I think it will let them feel a little bit like less stressed. Now, out of curiosity, out of curiosity, because you've worked with first time founders and all the way to people who are funded and even about to sell their companies, do you see this problem of, especially decision making, get less with time because of experience, or actually the more the business will grow, more decisions to come and more struggles and challenges from your
Yeah.
experience? What did you see in
Yeah.
that space?
So certain things absolutely get easier. I mean, like decisions that you grapple with in the beginning, you build some you habituate to, and those decisions sometimes get easier. But a bunch of different things popped into my head when you said that, and I'm hoping I can remember all of them. So first of all, if you are looking for like if you imagine that there will come a point in entrepreneurship where either from a decision standpoint or from a like psychology standpoint, like, people talk about like imposter syndrome. I'm like, if you imagine that goes away just because you reach some point, that I'm sorry. Like you probably, maybe you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. I don't know. You kind of have to love the grapple. Like there's always going to be, because what happens is, yes, you get better at some decisions, but then you have new, bigger decisions. And, you know, progress often looks like new problems. And that's what you have to love as an entrepreneur. I have a client who will joke, he was like, hey, I have new problems, so I guess I'm making progress, because that's just how it goes. Like there was a period, a very short period, where I tried to be someone who runs. I hate running. And so I've given that up. But for a while, it was all cardiovascular. Like if I ran a shamefully low amount of time, I would be so out of breath that I would have to stop. Well, one day I was running and all the tiny muscles around my ankles started stinging and like up my calf. And I was like, oh, I can now cardiovascularly run far enough that I am encountering the new problem of the weakness of the muscles in my feet. And that is how entrepreneurship works. So you are always going to have new problems. And so building your resilience and your, I don't know if I could say excitement around, like, but your tolerance for and your willingness to embrace it as like, okay, this is like, now I have new problems. This is a new thing to do. So there's absolutely that. It does get easier, but also some things get easier, some things are always hard. But there's also this thing where you will just sometimes like I had a client, a long-term client who's multiple companies. This is like his third or fourth startup that he's building to sell. He has hired and fired countless people. And he did one of the like joked like the bat signal calls. Like he was like, hey, do you have time this afternoon? I'm like, absolutely. That's how my model works. he calls and he wanted to talk through the conversation of letting someone go. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised. Like even doing all this work and seeing people. So I literally asked him, I said, I gotta ask you, like, I'm sort like, I know you've done this a bunch of times. I know you actually have a really beautiful way of handling your people. Like I really respect how he leads. I'm like, why? And he explained to me the circumstances about it. And as soon as he said it, it made perfect sense. But there will even things that you're already air quotes good at, there will be moments or like variables that get added into that soup that change the flavor in a way that all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, this one feels hard and yucky. And I always think of it, and maybe this is the perfect example. What he needed was not like a class or an article or like best practices from an HR person of how, like, all of that is irrelevant. Um, my mom used to use this metaphor of a filing cabinet or a set of drawers. You know, if you pull drawers out and you too many, that it will topple and you have to like push them back in to like reestablish the center of gravity. That is what people need more often than not when they are feeling unsure or indecisive or just wobbly or unsettled about a thing, is you have to help them push in the drawers that shouldn't be pulled out. You have to separate like fears, separate like the facts from like fears and fictions that they're making up, and help them find what's like real and true. And that like recenters them, and then they're good and they can go do their thing. But we all need that kind of that never goes away. There is no point at which you will just know and have all the answers.
A- Absolutely, because it's as you mentioned at the beginning, like it's like a kind of a sprint. It's not like a marathon,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes.
it's like a continuous education, and I believe, and from what I have watched and listened and read, is the successful ones were the ones who were always learning, were always uh, trying to get their game up. Uh, Jody, like, we covered a lot today, and I would like to ask you where, especially first time founder, they can find more about you.
Yeah. So if you my website is at thecore.com. And so there you can find information about my one-on-one services. That's also where you can there's a link there to book a connection call with me. That is it's like 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I will tell you, that is not a sales call. That is not how I handle those. It's I've learned, this is my 20th year of doing this work. Um officially since I first started. And I will tell you, very, very, very early on, I learned the wonderful lesson that like when it works, it just works. And when it doesn't, I usually know someone who is, or like have a resource for the person for whom it is. But that's how you can find out about the group, or just, I welcome anyone to book that call and we can have a quick chat and see what they are grappling with and what I would recommend. Because interestingly, the entire way that I stumbled on this sort of like, I don't know, it feels like a next evolution of coaching, of this like decision support, the on call, was because of how many people would call me and want an introductory session because they thought they needed a coach. And I would talk to them, and over and over and over again, I was like, you don't need a coach. You don't need a 6-month program. You don't need an advisor or a consultant. Like, you had one issue and now you're clear. Go back and do your thing. Call me later if you want another single session. But I was doing that as like an intro call. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, this is actually what people need, is they just need to get clear. And so, because that's not the most obvious off your shelf service, like, I just welcome people, like, it's half hour, just have a chat. Sometimes you just need to get clear and then go about your business. So
Absolutely, I love this because again, they are busy probably, and they need to act fast. And I love the way you name it this way, like on call support, right? So it's like the hotline, right? So for business
it is.
decision.
It is. It's like a hotline. My marketing person wanted me to call it Founders Lifeline. I was like, oh, I don't know. I kind of love that, but it's just on the edge of a little bit cheesy for me. So I'm like, I don't think I can do that, but it's on the books. But
Mm, No, absolutely, absolutely. Like I think it's much needed. So I will make sure I will put the link in the show notes so people can reach out to you, Jody. Thank you again. Really, I enjoyed the conversation. I
me
learned
too.
personally. I learned a lot of things from you, and this is why actually I do what I do, because bringing thought leaders like yourself, people who are experienced like yourself, Jody, to share their experience and insights and make the journey for fellow entrepreneurs easier than previously it was done. So I'm
Well,
happy that.
I appreciate you and your show. You have some wonderful guests. It's a fantastic
Thank
show.
you.
So I really appreciate that you do what you do. It matters.
Oh, thank you. That's really a review from you that I appreciate. And this is, usually how I end my episodes. So this is for the audience. If you discovered this podcast by luck, someone sent you here. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe, and we are on all the podcasting platforms. Share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the loyal fans who keep coming again and again, thank you very much for your loyalty. And I appreciate all the notes that you send me. I appreciate all the emails. I read them all. And plus, if you are interested to be on the show, I repeat this again and again. You know how to find me. Reach out if you have something interesting, you want to discuss something related to tech, entrepreneurship, and startups. Reach out and we can arrange this. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll have a new episode very soon. Thank you.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.